Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third session in this year's Environmental Ethics Symposium. It's been such a great conversation so far, and I'm sure this session is going to be amazing too. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. It's my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Maria Blevins. She does some really pioneering work around sexual harassment in the whitewater rafting industry and outdoor industry. Associate Professor of Communications here at UVU. So Maria, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for coming to us today.
Thank you so much, Hillary. And thank you all for tuning in to listen to this presentation. I just want to let you know that this content is like a little salty, and this presentation will be a lot of the direct words from the people that I interviewed. And it can be hard stuff to talk about. So, if you need a little break, get up, get a drink of water, take care of yourself is like the main thing that I want to say. My title today is All Forward, Negotiating Gender in the Whitewater Industry. And for those of you that have never been whitewater rafting, All Forward is a command that raft guides will give as they are negotiating whitewater. So it's like a little nod to the sport and to a command that's often given, and also a nod to what I'm hoping is going to be happening through this research and through all of the people that are really interested in changing this culture. So a little introduction. My name is Maria, and Hillary did a really awesome introduction of the fact that I'm an academic and a scholar in the Department of Communication here at Utah Valley University. But before I was an academic, I was a whitewater rafting guide. And this is a picture of me on one of my not better days of doing that job. I had hit a big rock right there and had some big consequences. But being a whitewater rafting guide is a key part of my identity. I really loved that job, and I learned a lot of skills. I grew a lot in that job. And it was part of what I did for 12 years. And so I come to this research project as someone that cares a lot about this industry and cares a lot about the people that participated in it. And of course, my own experiences offer me a lens in which I investigated this group. This particular project got my attention in 2016 when a group of employees at Grand Canyon National Park came together, and they reported years of sexual harassment and assault by the river rangers in Grand Canyon. And so these women came together. They wrote a letter to then Secretary of Interior Sally Jewell, and it basically just outlined a lot of kind of crummy behavior. And I was thinking about it, and I realized that I had gone down the river on a research trip with these same folks a few years before. And I looked back and thought about, well, these guys, they were so nice. I cannot even imagine that they would be the perpetrators of these acts. And then I thought a little deeper, and I remembered about the rapid that they encouraged a lot of the women on the trip to run without tops on. And the sort of harassment that happened to one of the other women of the trip who was married, and one of the guides continued even after the trip was over, sort of asking her to come visit him and asking her to go on another river trip. And thinking back to some of my own experiences of things that were said to me or actions that really didn't make me feel comfortable. And after being an academic that studies organizations and feminism for years, I was really struck by the fact that it had not jumped out to me that those behaviors were inappropriate. If a coworker or someone I was working with at one of my other jobs had done those things, it would have felt really shocking. But I had been so socialized in my experience as a whitewater rafting guide, and the environment is so accepting of sort of behaviors that aren't really accepted in other environments. I was pretty blind to them. And I talked to some other raft guides, particularly females that I had worked with through the years. And we all started talking about what was going on there. This is really interesting. There was a lot of behavior that we would never stand for. We all felt that we were pretty strong women, but we had been socialized to think it was just okay in this group. So I start this presentation with a sign that one of my participants reported was on the door of check-in at the raft company. So when you came to get ready for your trip, this sign was waiting for you. Sexual harassment will not be reported, but it will be graded. And I think that that sets the tone for this entire conversation. In this industry, for a lot of people I talked to, sexual harassment was kind of seen as a joke. And this organization sort of had more of an approach like you would imagine from like the show Mad Men, where it was just expected and part of what happens. And in fact, made into a joke that you need to be good at sexually harassing people. So I want to tell you about my methodology. I mainly use participant observation. So I hung out on rivers, which was a really fun way to do research. I went to river festivals. I hung out at whitewater rafting companies. I also interviewed 58 people that worked on rivers throughout the United States and the world. And these raft guides worked both day trips where they meet the folks in the morning and they do a fun rafting trip and then they're done in the afternoon, and multi-day, which are overnight trips where you take everything you need with you to cook and clean and live for up to 3 weeks. And so I had a really large participant of the kind of guides that exists in the US. I talked to people that identified of a lot of genders. And so I wasn't only looking at people that identify as women, I was looking at everyone to sort of see what they thought was happening in the organization. So today what I'm going to do is talk to you about the unique working environment, how it's different than a lot of other jobs. I'm going to explore some of the pop culture messages about the industry. I'm going to demonstrate the strategies that women use to be successful in these organizations and outline some of the issues with reporting harassment that people I talked to outlined. And then I'm going to give some suggestions to consider for change and really tie this into why I think this is important as we consider environmental ethics. So thanks for joining me as we dive a little deeper. So before I start, I have gotten feedback about, as I've talked to other people about my research, there is a lot to love about this job. You get to be on the river. I had multiple experiences where I got to see eagles fighting with osprey and catching fish. Your exposure and your ability to observe nature, geology, to learn about the local histories of the rivers is pretty incredible. And although I will describe the behaviors of some bad actors in this organization, there's a lot of really good folks that work and live on the river. And some of my closest friends to this day, I met on river trips. So I just want to be clear that it is not all negative. And I'm going to highlight some of the quotes that represent that. Martha went on a river trip as a customer, and she described the experience like this. When the trip was over and I was back home, I realized that I was in love with whitewater, actually in love with it. I would wake up at night, I would dream about it. I felt that euphoric feeling that you feel when you're in love, thinking about the river and the beautiful canyon sites. And while I realized that it's what I wanted to do, at that time, I didn't necessarily think this is what I'm going to do for a long time, but I've got to do this. The best description of it is like being in love, like actually being in love with another human. But I had that reaction to whitewater and nature and that lifestyle. And Martha is one of the participants that I talked to that started guiding in the 80s and is still an active whitewater rafting guide at the company she started with decades later. The next thing that highlights why people love this job, Bria said, well, this job itself is pretty amazing to me, just because I get to do something that I absolutely love to do, run whitewater. And I get to teach someone else how to do that too. You get to see people fall in love with something that you love. And I think that's just magic. I think just getting to be on the river teaches you so much, and then you're bringing a handful of strangers out doing it. So you can see that the word love comes up really often with these participants. So I just want that to set this stage, that there are really incredible parts of this job. With that said, I want to outline how this is a super unique working environment. When you work on the river, like I said, there are multi-day trips where you might be out with the same people for up to 3 weeks. And you have your trip leader and your coworkers and the customers, but it's not like an easy thing to call HR if something goes amiss. As Amelia said, everything. I mean, it would be like if you went to the office from 9 to 5 and then everyone in your office came home with you and you all made dinner together. And then you had a sleepover on your living room floor, 3 feet from each other. And you did that for 6 days in a row or 14 days in a row without really seeing anyone else or interacting with or engaging with anyone else. So it's really, especially with multi-day guiding, it's really, you're sort of on 24/7. And in that way, I don't think you're doing the work that you do in a normal workplace. So you get this idea that you're constantly on, you're constantly working, and you're constantly surrounded by your coworkers. Ken kind of talked a little bit about how it's also kind of a party atmosphere. So he said, you don't always have to be clean. You don't always have to look professional. You don't always have to act professional. You can abuse drugs, tobacco, and alcohol. And that's not something that's frowned upon in the industry. That's a big one. You can be a loudmouth jackass and no one seems to care, or it's almost encouraged. So I am guessing you're seeing some things that are not acceptable at your workplace, but do happen sort of in this rafting community. And so this unique job leads to an environment where different kinds of harassment happen. So I asked the question to participants, does harassment happen there? And Nicole had this quote, I felt this sexist attitudes and language that was used is something in any other work environment I've never seen. It's totally unacceptable. And there it was just standard. The way that people talk to each other, that I think is the main difference. But also, most of my other jobs haven't been guide jobs. On the river was the only place I've ever really experienced people swearing as much as they did, and just the blatant out there sexism and other biases that are just okay to be talked about. And so Nicole says that she was really shocked by the behavior there. These are 3 other responses that I got when I asked, does harassment happen? Tim said, effing millions. And no, I can't remember them all. Millions, probably 65 today, minimum. Will said, yeah, every day. And Elizabeth said, every day, like 10,000 times a day. So you get this idea that this is not a normal workplace, that behaviors and actions that would be considered unacceptable anywhere else are just sort of part of the culture and accepted as what it's like to work at this place. And interestingly, when we go to the US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they outline some of the characteristics of workplaces where harassment is more likely to occur. And the rafting industry has a lot of these characteristics that make harassment more likely. So in workplaces that feature homogeneous employees, which often in the rafting industry, it's all people that enjoy whitewater. It's often people that look similar, hold similar values, are similar ages. The next important one is workplaces with many young employees. So often whitewater rafting is a job for folks that are in college, or perhaps folks that are just beginning their lives. It's a lot of people in their 20s. And young employees have not learned appropriate behavior. They might still be behaving in a way that they did in college or in high school. Young workers are a little more immature and don't understand the consequences of their behavior. When a young employee is targeted, they might not have the skills or knowledge to defend themselves. And more experienced workers might take advantage of younger employees as they're learning how to do the job and building their confidence. It also outlines that workplaces with power differences that are large between employees have more likelihood of harassment. And that is very much the structure in the rafting industry. You have your senior guides and your trip leaders that have been doing the job for years, and you have your first year or even trainees that are new to the industry. Jobs that are focused on customer satisfaction and service. We will talk a little later about customers coming expecting a certain experience from the raft guide. And so even the customers are sort of prone to harassing female guides. The workplaces that are isolated from other people, like I said before, you can be on a 2 to 3 week trip down at the bottom of a canyon where you're not seeing anyone but the folks on that trip. So you are very isolated, and there is not a lot of places to go for help or support. Workplaces that abide in drinking or abusing alcohol, as Ken's quote documented, often people are drinking on those multi-day trips. You serve a cocktail with dinner to your customers, and often the guides enjoy that as well. A lot of the day trip outfitters have bars on site, and so the drinking is sort of built into the activity. And last, workplaces that are decentralized. And again, you might have the base camp where the owner and the managers operate, but the guides are out in the wilderness doing this work. So as you can see, guiding is really prone to a lot of the behaviors or the characteristics that create an environment that is ripe for harassment. And I think it's important to remember that, because it's not necessarily that people are terrible, but it is a situation where this behavior is likely to occur. So I talked a little bit about how organizations that are trying to make customers happy, where customer satisfaction is a goal, are often prone to harassment. There's quite a bit of research on the industry of servers in restaurants and how they are prone to harassment. What I want to talk about here is the expectation that customers have when they show up to go rafting, of what their guide is going to look like and who their guide is going to be. So almost every single person I talked to outlined an experience where a customer showed up and was really upset when they got a female raft guide. So let me share some of those quotes with you. Alma described, at the top of big rapids, I feel it a lot, where people are choosing boats and I feel like a really competent rower. And yet I still feel like people from the outside are so ready to look to the tall bearded man before they look at me. And there's this instant of being on the river and our baggage boater who's never been down this river before, but was 6 feet tall and wearing flannel and has a big full beard. And these customers are like, we want to be in this guy's boat. And it's like, okay, yeah, he has a beard, but I've been reading water for 15 years and I have 4,000 commercial miles and I've been in this river 3 or 4 times in this season. Like, yeah, I'm 5'3", but I'm a little more qualified than this taller man. And I think in these situations, I don't know what to say, because it's not a huge thing to be choosing a boat, but you should look this way before you look that way. Marcus described it like this. They're going to listen to me because I'm a big burly man, but a woman is just as capable as a big burly man, needs to convince those big burly guys that she's capable. So does she have a harder job? It's not sexuality. She just has to say, hey, I'm effing competent river guide and you need to, I can get you down this river and give you a great ride. She has a harder row. What's that word again? Harder. So Marcus points out that in addition to the labor of just being a competent and good guide, the female guides have to convince their customers that they are that. And this story is probably one of the ones that shocked me most as I collected data. Nicole tells about, she had a big Girl Scout group. She was down at the river, it was high water, and they were putting on at the company's property, which was higher up than the normal put in. And so she was down blowing boats and the rest of the guides and stuff came down with a group and their bus and they showed up and divvied everyone out. And she had a handful of Girl Scouts, 2 leaders or something like that. And she's giving them her spiel and wanting them to be ready. And they're like looking everywhere and whispering to each other. She was like, what's the deal? What's going on here? We need to be on the same team here if we're going to be out on the river together. I'm going to do my best to keep y'all safe, but I want you to talk to me if there's something wrong. And they were just like, we don't want a female guide. Trying to be a good role model for young women, you want to bring these women down the river, and they weren't pulling me aside to say it. They said it in front of the Girl Scouts. So yeah, these troop leaders that had come to introduce young women to the outdoors didn't want a female raft guide. And I think that that was really telling. And a common experience that, like I said, almost every participant have. But I don't think people are just awful. I think people have expectations in their mind that they have developed somewhere. So I got a little curious about where people were building their expectations of who is going to be their raft guide. So the first thing that I looked at was the websites of rafting companies. So I chose 30 rafting company websites that were across the US from a lot of different regions of rivers. And I mainly looked at the pictures to see who they were like showing off to be their raft guide. And this picture right here is on websites often called the hero shot. And most of the pictures look like this. It's a male guide or a guide that you can't tell the gender, having really big hits and really showing off their abilities to really get that whitewater. The pictures of women are often them on the beach serving lunch or hanging out in a bikini on a paddleboard in flat water, but they are they're in all of the 30 river websites that I looked at that all have multiple pictures. There were only 3 photos of female guides getting a big hit. So when these customers are booking their trip, I think that they are sort of expecting or anticipating that the guide is going to be a male. The next thing I did is I went back and I looked for any movie that portrayed rafting or canoeing down a river that I could find. And the first river I found was made in the 1920s, and it was sort of a silent movie with the music and the bold print talking about going down the Grand Canyon. And it, of course, just says the men that choose to do this are some of the bravest. And then some of these other movies range from madcap comedies to action adventure to Deliverance, which is a pretty famous movie about, I would put it in the genre of sort of horror. In all of these movies, or most of these movies, I have one exception that I'll be talking about. The movie is about a group of dudes that are going down the movie or down the river, that are braving the rapids, that are doing these brave things. And the women that are featured in these movies are either romantic love interests, or they are folks that need to be rescued, or there is like one woman in the ratio of the rest of them, the men going down the river. And so, if people have been watching movies about rafting, they might get this idea that it's going to be dudes on the water. I'm going to share with you one of my favorite clips that really shows how men are the heroes in these situations. This comes from Indiana Jones, so just sit back and enjoy this. All right, so those of you that have never been rafting before, I just want you to know that the parachuting and the tobogganing down the river is not usually part of the rafting experience. But I feel like that clip really gives a good example. At the end, the woman says, "I hate the water. I hate you. I hate rafting." And Indiana Jones gets to be the hero of this moment. And so we imagine that the woman is just sort of like along to be saved. And so people have these ideas from rafting movies that the woman might not be as engaged. And then I go back even further to even who we anticipate is going to be our outdoor wilderness adventure guide. And so here I have three fellows you might recognize or maybe not. We have Thoreau, John Muir, and Edward Abbey, three sort of famous environmental writers that advocate for the preservation of wilderness. And you'll notice that they kind of have a similar look. They seem to be tall, fit, white men with beards. And I think we get this idea that this is who's outside. These are who the competent outdoor wilderness folks are. And just in comparison, I'm showing the picture of four of my favorite female outdoor wilderness writers: Amy Irving, Pam Houston, Terry Tempest Williams, and Robin Wall Kimmerer. And you can see that perhaps you don't recognize them at first sight. Perhaps you don't even recognize their names as the advocates for outdoor, as we do expect to see men in those positions. So I want to go back. I said there was one movie that was an exception, and that movie is right here, The River Wild. This came out in 1994, and I saw it my freshman year of college. And in rewatching it for this project, really Gail, the main character, who's played by Meryl Streep, is this powerful and incredible woman that you might not even see in many other movie characters. And I really have thought back and wondered if that night that I saw this movie at the Dollar Theater with my dad and my sister really influenced a lot of choices that I ended up making, because she was a movie character who was the kind of woman that I wanted to be, that was clever and strong and could think on her feet. And so I do want to point out there is this outlier of the River Wild that really portrays a female raft guide in an incredible way. But one other interesting observation is that on forums that talk about this movie and in the Whitewater world, I would repeatedly hear, oh yeah, I have this friend, he's kind of slight of build and he had long blonde hair, and he was the person that did all of the rowing in that movie. And when you actually look into it, it was two female raft guides that were her body doubles, and they were pretty incredible. So I think it's interesting that in the telling of the tales, even men are placed as the body double in this movie, because we just don't often put women at the forefront of being these competent, capable guides. So I've talked to you a little bit about the interesting working environment. I've talked to you about customers that come in and are really disappointed to get female raft guides. And I've talked to you about the sexual harassment that happens in this industry. What I want to talk to you now is specifically the strategies that women or people that don't fit the mold of who we expect to be at raft guides, what they do to fit in this environment, how they convince their coworkers and the people that they're taking down the river that they're competent. And so I asked this specific question, hey, what strategies do you use? Or what did you do to be successful in this career? And then I coded these for these responses. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the top ones that came up. So the first one is being tough. Ari said, I know a lot of really good female raft guides, but they're really tough people. And I think that's what it takes for women to survive in this industry, is that they be tougher than average. One more quote about being tough. John said, I think raft guides and outdoor folks in general, as you know, usually don't bring the softest people in. So they're usually the women that I've worked with are pretty tough women. They're pretty great. So the thin skin doesn't usually last too long in the guiding world. So that first strategy is for guides to be tough, to just know that this environment isn't going to be the easiest, but overcome it with toughness. The next is using humor, and this came up a lot. Just in general, the environment of raft guiding is you're sort of in the role of an entertainer. So as I outlined what's fun about the job, a lot of people outlined just how funny their coworkers are and how much joking goes on. But that humor was a strategy that women use to fit in. Adam said, I would say over the years, I've seen this. I've seen many people have to deal with it. And I think probably the most common, and unfortunately maybe the most effective, is just when women just laugh it off. It's no big deal, haha, because I think there's a need to be perceived as strong. And that if they get upset or lash out or cry or file a complaint, well, then that's someone who just can't roll with it. And that's someone who's weak or whatever. So you can see that Adam not only talks about using the humor and like just laughing it off and pretending it's a joke, but also that you need to be strong, and also that it's not going to go over really well if you file a complaint or you outline that this is inappropriate. Crystal said, I think definitely just starting to dish it back at the guys. If they sort of harass me, not that I would necessarily sexually harass them back, but I would tell a dirty joke and I would just laugh at the lewd remarks. So as you can see, women are like, okay, well, if this is going to be what the environment is, I'm going to tell jokes back. And a lot of participants said not only did they tell jokes back, they behaved in a really crass manner. So Brent outlined some of the women have worse mouths than any male I've ever heard in my life. Of course, they're accepted quicker because all the guys think they're more fun. You're not walking on eggshells around what you can say about them. So you can see there's a reward to being crass. Albert described crass women like this. A lot of the ladies that I've encountered at Raft Camp, that's what they do. They try to be bigger and badder and more vulgar. Do it to a greater extent than the other people that are offending you or pissing you off. And my last quote about crass that it really stuck out to me. Amelia said, I thought of it as just being one of the guys and making dirty jokes. I think when you're there, it's like, oh, I know how to fit in. I can swig PBR and say cuss words. And so she talked about the strategy she used was to just say a lot of bad words, maybe drink some beer, and be a guy's gal, which was more explicitly stated by Olivia, who said, What's viewed as good in the rafting world is strength and toughness and being tough and macho. And so you see these women who are struggling to be as macho and tough and hard as they can be. And they're getting drunk with the guys and they're going beer for beer and they're telling dirty jokes and they're acting rude and vulgar and they're lifting the heavy shit and they're flipping the rafts and they're being as macho as the men can be. So this outlines a strategy where you just try to show that you can do everything a dude can do and sort of minimize your feminine attributes. Raven said, I can be just as tough as them or tougher. I can hurt them before they hurt me, and I can just go ahead and tell them that they can't hurt me. You can be one of the boys. You can be grosser than them. So for me, that worked. Okay, I'll be a boy, and I'll be the boyiest boy of them all. So not only are you a guy's gal, you are trying to perform masculinity than the men that you work with. Adam's quote kind of spoke to this, but laughing it off and not reporting it is another strategy. So Crystal said, there are definitely times when I remember other guides saying things to me that would make me feel uncomfortable about my performance or my physical appearance or about something, but I would mostly try to laugh it off and then distance myself from that person. Justin said a similar thing. I actually think that the girls that don't get offended at sexual connotation jokes fit in better, and guys accept them more quickly and easily than others that do get offended. If you say something about whatever, you make some little crack and somebody gets offended and you're like, okay, she's not cool. She's not fun. And, out on the river, you need your fellow guides to be having your back. And when you're living and working together, you don't want to be the outlier. You don't want to be the person that doesn't fit in. And so often you just laugh it up and you don't think that there's any recourse you can do because that's unacceptable to report. A lot of people reported that they just had to be good or exceptional at the job. Emily said, so it forces you to have to be basically perfect. Like, the guys, they could do stuff like make a mistake or something, and it was just laughed about. And if a girl makes a mistake, then they aren't confident. So as a woman, you do the job like that. I think you have to be perfect. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard than the guys for sure. And Carmen said, oh, I think it makes it way harder because people just assume you're not competent and that you're not strong and that you can't row heavy boats in Whitewater or run a motor or lift shit. And you just have to work so much harder. I always work with a lot of dudes who I love, but they're kind of dipshits and maybe not the most competent with their thoughts. They're fine. They're average guys, but every single woman I work with out there is so spectacular. So the women have to be super high achievers and the men can just be competent because people expect they're going to be good at the job. Another strategy that was outlined was to get a boyfriend and have that boyfriend pass the time that relationship works for you because you felt protected because people viewed that boyfriend as you were sort of like their property. So Lee said, I was dating someone very seriously, a man very seriously, and everyone kind of respected that and didn't really bother me too much. And Mary said, yeah, I eventually ended up with just sticking in a relationship with one of them and staying in that relationship way past any time that I should have stayed with him, more for safety than for love, just so I wouldn't have to worry. Like since he was my boyfriend, I had his protection. So being partnered with a man was helpful to people, and they felt that they would be harassed less if they were partnered. Women also described that they warned each other about actors in the company that demonstrated poor behavior who had harassed or assaulted other women. Pearl said, but yeah, there's times when you can act as a protector or a protectant. And I think that's kind of the dynamic in any workplace of how women will do that whisper thing. Like, hey, look out for this guy. He's bad news. He'll play that game and he'll do great as long as you do such and such. So that kind of exists, not exactly in the same way that it might in a traditional workplace. So we all know that whisper networks operate in a lot of organizations, but as Amelia says, you knew who is not above board. You knew who not to hang around with. You knew who not to be alone with. That existed. There were people that were like, don't go on an overnight by yourself with them. That's not cool, which of course means someone else did and learned that lesson. So the consequences are a lot higher when you are going into the wilderness with coworkers that are sort of known to do bad behaviors to harass and assault women. And the last strategy that I'm going to talk about today, there are more that I identified, but it's that they leave. Gretchen said they all leave. None of these badass women that I'm referring to, with the exception of one, and she's making a real commitment out of it, trying to be on the USA raft team, but most of the women left. It's a part of their life that they love, and they're glad that they did it, but you are just surrounded by man children. Kim said, my sister left because she was assaulted, which is part of the reason that I didn't come back to live full time. And I'm going to let those just sit in, right? We demonstrated that people have a real love of the river, that have a real love of this job, but because they do not feel safe, they leave this industry. The last thing I want to report is on the process of reporting, which is how you would report to someone in the company that you were having a problem. And Albert said, that's a great question, because I don't think anyone knows. I don't think anyone would be able to come up with someone they felt that they could trust enough to report. Alma said, that's such a great question, because when you're saying that, I don't know how to report. So these are all raft guides that have worked at their company for years, and they're not sure who they would go to report to. So next, I want to ask the question, why is this important, and what do we do next? I think Jane's quote sums it up pretty well. A lot of time in the beginning, especially when they're younger men, they're like, oh, are you sure you can do this? It's a lot of questioning your ability, questioning whether or not they're safe with you. And again, you have to project. And this is not something I think men have to do, but you have to project your abilities. You have to make people feel comfortable, and somehow you have to change your demeanor enough to come off like you own it, so that nobody questions whether they're safe with you or whether or not you can do the job that you're supposed to be doing. And I choose this quote because I think we have to ask ourselves questions like, can we change the culture so that everybody is safe? So at raft companies, are there ways that we can make this so people feel more confident being there and they don't necessarily have to leave? Can we interrogate our cultural narratives about who we expect leading outside adventures? So this means, can we rise the voices of women, people of color, non-binary people, that they are really competent and welcome in the outdoors, and change our idea of who we expect to be leading a trip, that it's not necessarily just going to be a tall white dude. And we have to stop putting the responsibility on women to be strong, tough, or sassy enough to put up with bad behavior. I feel like Hazel said this really well when she said, you're not going to change the culture. You're going to complain and be the one raising a ruckus about it. You're not going to have as many friends, so you'd rather just fit in and have friends and laugh along. And I think that quote is really powerful, because if we do not provide a way for people to report and a way for this culture to change, then we are asking women and people of color and minorities and non-binary folks to do a lot of extra labor to just convince folks that they belong outside, that they should be part of the conversation. They might not feel safe out there, but everyone should feel safe in the natural world, and they should care about the natural world. And I think that it's really tough to care about a place that you don't feel welcome in. And so I think there are some environmental, ethical repercussions when we really limit who we expect to be outside. Carolyn Finney, in her book, White Spaces, Black Faces, does a really great job of talking about how people of color fit into the natural environment. And I think that there are similar things to be said about women. It does not feel safe for them, and that is an important thing to consider. And I think that we are not going to have an appreciation of wilderness until everyone feels safe out there. So now what? I think organizations that do this work of guiding, even ski resorts and summer camps, should think through their reporting systems. Are they easy to navigate? Who can people report to? Are there multiple people you can report to? Do women have positions of leadership, and can they be reported to? Or do the people being harassed have to go to folks they might not feel comfortable talking to? So are there a lot of ways to report what's happening? And will they be believed? I think having honest conversations about what harassment can look like is really important. Like I said, the humor and the joking is a big part of being a raft guide. And I don't think it's necessarily necessary to totally take out all joking or all sort of crude behavior. But I do think we have to talk about consent. And I think we have to talk about, do people want to be having these jokes? And is it a safe place to say, hey, this doesn't feel good to me today. Can we not joke around like this? Could I not be in this situation today? And have people not take it personally, just know that it's not what feels great about today. And I would ask organizations, do you have people in your organization that other folks are warned about? And why are you protecting them? Sometimes it's our senior guides. Sometimes it's people that we hold in a great deal of respect. And sometimes it's people that we love that are problematic characters. Are we talking to these folks? Are we confronting them? And are we holding them accountable? Some now what's, I think train people to deal with sexist comments or sexual harassment from customers, have one-liners, and let customers know that they can be banned for the company or asked to leave a trip. Train the TLs on how to handle a customer that's harassing a guide. And some companies are even having customers sign a code of contact that says, hey, I'm going to behave in this particular way to the guides and the other customers on the trip. And additionally, I would ask, what bodies are we expecting outside? Do you have groups of people that you know are joked about, whether that be because of gender, whether that be because of race, whether that be because of socioeconomic status? That's not okay. We need to be welcoming everyone in these outdoor spaces. And if your company does continually joke about folks in those spaces, maybe talk about why and definitely nip that in the bud. And wonder about what a fun working environment. Is this fun for everyone? Who might not be having fun and who might feel like they need to leave? I'm going to end with this quote that Amelia talked about, where her companies have been making some of these changes. And it paints a really cool picture of how everybody benefits, not just women, everybody benefits. She said, yeah, I think a big meta example is like my company. By the time I got there, there were enough senior guides who were women in leadership, and the culture as a whole has shifted. And it's really cool to see, you know, guides are still hooking up and breaking up and all that stuff, but there's sort of this expectation of care. And I think a big part of it is that the men also feel really comfortable being vulnerable and being caretakers and reading poetry. Like, it was an interesting thing because for whatever reason, that culture evolved into a place where women could really be strong and powerful and row boats. But at the same time, there was a space created where the men could do things that were typically ascribed to the female gender. And that just feels like a really beautiful place where people don't have to perform super masculine traits. People don't have to be tough and people don't have to be strong. They can just be themselves and we can expect them to be outside. Please email me if you have questions or if we don't get to them today, or if you are just interested in this topic. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much for that like whirlwind, whitewater, raft wind of a journey for us. And also thanks to your participants in your research for sharing that. I'm sure that was a whole journey in itself. So we do have some questions from the YouTube. So I appreciate you all out there. And yeah, I'm just going to read a couple of them. One is, how can men be allies in the whitewater industry? And maybe this can even go larger, like how can we be allies if we see sexual harassment, particularly in that industry, but even broader?
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate that you talked about broader. I think that because these behaviors are kind of still allowed in whitewater rafting, it happens there in sort of a more dramatic or exciting scale. But I think that these behaviors happen in every industry, and that these strategies that people used to fit in are being used in every strategy. And so to be a good ally, I would say the first thing is think about, are people using these strategies? They might not be reporting that they feel uncomfortable in this culture, but you know, if you notice that like a lot of people in your organization tell a lot of body jokes or a lot of sort of off-color humor, you know, be aware of that and maybe stop and look at your culture and say, what's happening? I think all of us stepping in and again, holding people accountable, even if they're people we love, when we know that we're already warning folks about working with them, thinking through how are they getting on the schedule and how much work are they getting. And I think there's a lot of power in just asking people, hey, are you okay? I saw that interaction and your face got a little weird when that joke was told. Does this feel all right? And then I cannot encourage enough conversations about consent. We often talk about consent in like having sex with individuals, but I think you can talk about consent as far as like, what's the culture that we want? And being open to people saying, that joke doesn't feel funny to me, or maybe that joke doesn't feel funny to me today. So a lot of participants talked about a raft company where there was a culture of this thing they called good game. And so they would slap each other on the bottom and say, good game. And I would say 4 or 5 of my participants were like, most days I had no problem with it, but I just had one day where I broke. And then my colleagues were not listening and didn't take action to it. And so I think understanding that what might feel funny one day might not feel funny the next, and respecting people when they say, can we just like not do that?
Yeah, thank you. That's so good. There's another great question here just about training programs for the rafting industry, particular or just kind of larger outdoor industries. Are there training initiatives happening? What's kind of the step forward?
Yeah, I'm really excited to say that when I started this project, I think a lot of raft companies were relying on traditional sexual harassment trainings like videos that didn't really fit their culture very well. But through my research, I've connected with some really great folks, and we've started an organization called ADASH. And we are out there working with the National Park Service, working with raft companies, working with individuals that are just whitewater recreationalists to offer trainings, to offer support. I'm piloting a program right now in Moab with an organization that does domestic abuse work. And we're going to reach out to all the raft guides and say, hey, you have a place to go if you need some support. So I am happy to say that a lot of outdoor specific training programs have happened. There are other people doing this good work in the form of for-profit and nonprofit organizations. And I think, like everyone since Me Too, every industry is saying, hey, can we look at ourselves and see where we might be having some blind spots in how this is working? And I think the outdoor industry is rising to the occasion and ready for a change. The women and the men are all ready for a change. And the non-binary folks. I do not mean to speak in a binary about gender.
Yeah, thank you. That's so great. It's exciting, yeah, that the outdoor industry that sometimes is not the most welcoming to all people is maybe changing. And I think that fits in really nicely with our theme for this year, women, gender, and the environment. But we've kind of taken that even further and just explored all these intersections and why some people feel safe in some environments and not. So thanks for contributing to that discussion. Let's see, I think we have time for one more question. This is an interesting question too, just thinking about, you even kind of talked about this in your wrap up, but about male attributes or female attributes, or even, things that we think are traditionally like feminine attributes that could lead to greater success. And the last story you shared, I think was really interesting because it kind of talked about that as women were more empowered than men could maybe embrace different things, or maybe there's space for more non-binary expression. So if you could speak a little bit to that, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, well, I want to start with, there is a lot of research, in particular in the field of communication, about gendered ways of communicating. I always feel really uncomfortable about that because I feel like we should all have all the tools in our toolkit to have whatever communication strategy you need, whether that be more masculine or feminine. And I think these next generations coming up are doing a great job at not necessarily attaching a gender with a behavior. But with that said, people come rafting and they're really nervous. If you've never been whitewater rafting before, that bus ride down to the river can feel really scary. And I think that a thing that is really valued to be a good raft guide is to communicate with your crew, find out the kind of adventure that they're looking for, to find out how you can put them at ease and turn them into a really good team that's going to work together. And although, again, I don't think those are necessarily limited to women that are good at that. I've seen a lot of men be great at those communication skills. I do think that listening and nurturing is sort of considered a more feminine trait. And I think it's so useful as a raft guide. I did talk to a friend who was really interesting. She had been a customer on a multi-day rafting trip. And I was telling her about my research. She's also a social scientist. And she said, this is really interesting. We had one female guide on this trip. And when I had hurt my hand, I went to her for the first aid because I thought she would be more nurturing than the men. And so again, I think we have to examine and interrogate all of our cultural ideologies about who's good at what, and just allow everyone to be good at everything, because we need a whole range of communication abilities to be good in this world.
I love that. That's such a beautiful place to stop. Yeah. Thanks, Maria, so much for sharing a little bit about yourself and about your research. And it's really exciting that you're working in these spaces and working to make whitewater rafting a more safe experience for everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us on the YouTube, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you listening.